thank you for being with me today for my 10th live session, recorded, as usual, from the Barn Theatre in Cirencester. And as usual, my huge thanks to them and to David Fowles, who's with me. I hope you're finding these discussions informative. And thank you, everyone who is sending in questions and comments. That's really valuable, so I urge you to keep doing that. The COVID-19 outbreak has significantly affected businesses across the country. To control the spread, many have had to close, furlough staff, and resulting in cash revenues drying up. Here in the Cotswolds, the fastest growing sector of the economy is tourism, employing 10% of the labour force, equaling 20,000 jobs. It is a sector that some estimate to be worth £1 billion a year to the Cotswolds economy, with 38 million visits to the area each year. As such a major source of income and employment for this area, I have naturally been contacted by a very high number of businesses in this sector. These businesses are concerned about the long-term impact that lockdown will have on them. As the tourist sector begins, many may well remain shut. The longer they are closed, the less likely it is for them to reopen once we are back to full recovery. In addition to this, some businesses are keen to start opening, even under social distancing measures. Others do not think they will be able to open with these guidance in place. Now, Visit Britain has calculated that COVID-19's impact on tourism for the country, based on international travel, resuming in August, will lead to a 54% drop in visits and a 55% reduction in spend. The economic cost by the loss of domestic tourism, worth £88 billion annually to the economy, could, of course, be greater still. I'll be discussing the challenges faced in the hospitality, tourism and leisure industry in more detail with a panel of local experts from the sector, and many thanks to them for joining me. So joining me will be Vanessa Berridge, County Organiser for the National Garden Scheme, Justin Waterage, MD of Steps Travel, Julius Sibun of Sibun Events, Steve Collins, Chairman of Visit Gloucestershire and the Chairman of the Visitor Economy and Tourism Group on G1st on the LEP. And we are delighted to be joined today by a special guest, Dominic Cavendish, the leading theatre critic for the Daily Telegraph, who's joining us by Zoom from London. So before we start our conversation, I'll give a quick update on this week's announcements from Westminster. Everyone in the UK with coronavirus symptoms can now get a test. So anyone experiencing new symptoms of a continuous cough, high temperature, and now also a loss or change in normal sense of smell or taste is eligible for those tests. The government is recruiting 24,000 trackers to help in the contact tracing programme. And by the 1st of June, we should have 25,000 trackers capable of tracking contacts of 10,000 new cases a day. By way of comparison, on the 19th of May, there were only 2,472 tests with positive results. In Gloucestershire, the Mobile Testing Unit, MTU, in Gloucester, will be staying at the Oxstalls Tennis Centre until Tuesday, the 26th of May. This is delivered by the military under the Department of Health and Social Care Pillar 2 scheme. Essential workers are being prioritised for testing, and whilst allowing as many tests as possible for the wider population, essential workers and members of their household who have symptoms should continue to register for a test through the self-referral and employer portals. The government has announced a new care home support package backed by a £600 million ring-fenced adult social care infection control fund. This has been introduced to tackle the spread of COVID-19 in care homes. The government has written to councils and care providers outlining the details of this scheme and has provided additional advice and resources to help stop the spread of the infections in the care home sector. They've also extended the bereavement scheme to the NHS support staff and social care workers. This scheme means that families and dependents of staff who have died, sadly, most sadly, as a result of contracting coronavirus are offered indefinite leave to remain free of charge. The Cotswold District Council discretionary business rate scheme for smaller businesses not previously eligible for any government funding during the lockdown may be eligible for a grant of up to £10,000. The government-funded local authority discretionary business grant fund, which amounts to 1.76 million, will be available with guidance from the government on the type of businesses that the fund is aimed at. Specifically, those with ongoing property costs, small businesses who don't pay their own rates, such as market traders, lockups, etc., B&Bs who pay council tax, and charities. The amount available is small and will likely disappear very quickly, so I urge any businesses likely to qualify to apply as soon as possible. The application process to the District Council opens on the 1st of June and closes on 14 days later, with assessments starting the next day and payments being made the following week. The government hopes to be able to reopen schools for primary pupils from the 1st of June if the science suggests that it is safe to do so. They hope to begin to get primary pupils back into schools in stages, beginning with reception year 1 and 6. A degree of discretion will be left to our head teachers on how they can open to suit the needs of their particular schools, while always having health and safety uppermost in their minds. Thank you again for joining in to our session today.
Thank you, Sir Geoffrey, and welcome to everybody, and in particular to our guests on Question Time. As we discussed, we try and keep abreast with all the questions that we receive, and sadly, because of last week, we found ourselves with such a busy schedule that we weren't able to answer some of the questions that were posed. So could I start by just asking you those questions, Sir Geoffrey? They relate to agriculture, but I know that's a topic that you're very keen to address. The first question has come in via our email address and not via the live stream, and it's actually from an Alison Garn who lives in Maisiehampton and also has operation in Welford. And this was to do with, she wondered why you did not vote in favour of Neil Parish's amendments to the agricultural bill. She couldn't find any record of which vote you'd taken. I don't know if you can remember that bill and the amendments on it, and whether you'd like to take that now or answer Alison directly.
No, I'm very happy to take that now, David.
Okay.
So hello, Alison. So this is the agriculture bill is the first full-scale agriculture bill since the Agriculture Act of 1947. So this is a terrifically important piece of legislation for farmers, all those involved in the food industry, and for anybody who's interested in the environment. It's a long, complicated bill, but one of the provisions in the bill was to do with standards and animal welfare. And of course, British farmers have some of the highest standards in the world, and we don't want to see those reduced. But the wording in the bill was such that it was going to make free trade agreements with America quite difficult to conduct in their present form. We'd had conference calls with Minette Batters about this. I'd had conference calls with George Eustace, the Secretary of State, about this. And the government, at the time of the bill, was still trying to negotiate this matter, bearing in mind that legislation goes through both houses of Parliament with different stages, and bills get amended as they go along. At the point that we had to vote on this matter, the position was still uncertain. It's still being negotiated even today, and therefore I felt that it was not right to either vote for the bill as it stood or Neil Parish's amendment, which could have made those negotiations more difficult. And that is why, in a genuine sense of trying to reach a sense of compromise, I abstained on this motion.
Thank you, Sir Geoffrey. Now on to the live streams. From Ian Hughes, following the Question Time last week, testing is crucial for every industry returning to work, especially for farming when scores of pickers are required for crops on an annual basis. How is the government going to ensure that the testing target set by the Prime Minister recently of 200,000 can be achieved?
Well, in this whole testing, tracking and tracing was something that we had to get up from scratch very, very quickly indeed. And it's not just the number of tests that are the problem, it's actually their availability, getting people tested, getting those samples back to the labs in very large numbers, and then making sure the labs do their jobs properly so that the results are accurate, and then quickly getting the results back to the individuals who've been testing. So I think you can just see from what I've said, this is a very major exercise indeed. Yes, we were promised 100,000 tests by the end of April, and we virtually met that target. In fact, what happened was that the capacity was there, but the number of tests carried out in many cases was not as great as 100,000. And of course, you've got to keep making extending the target so that you build up the capacity in all the areas that I've talked about. And in the ideal, anybody who needs a test to go to work should have one. But I fear that that is going to take a little while to get to that system. We need, of course, at the moment, to be really clear that those involved in the health and care sectors get those tests, because the number of cases, particularly in the care sector, is still far too high.
Thank you. There was a secondary part to that question, which was that Ian was concerned that the tests that were mailed out, which aren't necessarily completed, were also included in the figure. And he's saying that perhaps there's a degree of disingenuity about how the numbers are actually compiled. But I think the overall objective is that the government is trying to get as many people tested as possible. And it must be hugely difficult to try and evaluate this every single day. But the issue of mailing versus tests done, I don't know if you're aware of that and have a view on it.
Well, I think obviously any tests that are available count towards the figure, but this is something that I've been involved with the big conference call we have each Friday with all the agencies in Gloucestershire, is if the testing centres are, as they are at the moment, near Cheltenham and near Gloucester, that does make it quite difficult for people in the Cotswolds to get tested. And I've been advocating a system whereby, at least for the hospitals and the GP surgeries and the care homes, there should be a system of having the tests carried out, or carrying out the testing, bulking them up into one lot, taking them off to whichever laboratory it is, getting them done, and then getting the results back. So I think there's still a lot of logistics work to do on all this. Bearing in mind that we started all this from scratch a couple of months ago, I actually think that everybody that's been involved in this, there's been a lot of cooperation, has done pretty well to get the number up to where it is at the moment.
We've got several other questions, Sir Geoffrey, but mindful of the fact that we've got our guests who've been very patient on the phone, could I suggest that we take the questions after the question time session and hand back to you for you to introduce our guests and to talk about the topic for today, which is hospitality, leisure and tourism. We will come back to the questions on farming, and we'll also try and deal with any questions we get through the live stream as well. So if you're happy to hand over to you, Sir Geoffrey, to go through the question time.
So I think, hello everybody and welcome, and thank you very much for coming on our panel today. In order to inform our visitors of who you are and what your particular business or interest is, I'm perhaps going to go around the panel for a start and let everybody introduce themselves very briefly and tell our audience what you actually do. So perhaps I might first start with you, Dominic Cavendish, and again reiterate my thanks to you. You're obviously an extremely busy man. You're coming live on stream from London, and we're really grateful to have you. Thank you very much. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, I have to say, I have escaped the city. I left London a decade ago, so I do travel a lot into London, I have done, to review theatre for the Daily Telegraph. But I moved to Chipping Norton about 3 years ago, so I have all the pleasures of the Cotswolds during lockdown. And yeah, as I was introduced, essentially I'm a theatre critic. I've been working for the Daily Telegraph since the year 2000, doing a lot of travelling around the country to see what's going on in the regions particularly. And in the last 5 years, sort of really divided my time between West End subsidised theatre and pretty much every theatre I can get to.
And I believe you've been to a performance at the barn here, have you?
That's right. I have to say, the barn was steaming ahead, and I suddenly thought, what's going on? I've missed out on something here. and it really is a powerhouse. I mean, I know those are that's a kind of critical cliche, but it is doing incredible work, has done incredible work, and during lockdown has led the way in digital innovation, social media, all kinds of examples of shows, one of which is this one.
Well, I know those comments will be greatly appreciated by all these people who have been steadfastly here through all these shows, the last 10 of them, and I know those comments will be greatly appreciated. So, Dominic, I'll come back to you in a minute, but I'd like to introduce everybody else. Vanessa Berridge, would you like to just introduce yourself and tell our audience what you do?
Well, I'm the county organiser for the National Garden Scheme in Gloucestershire, and you'll see behind me some of our distinctive yellow signs, which you ought to be able to see all around the countryside at this time of year. But of course, you're not seeing because all our gardens are closed. We open gardens for nursing and health charities, and we've been doing this since 1927. And this is the first time we've ever had to close. We kept our gardens open even during the Second World War, when they were really sort of rather part of the war effort with raising people's spirits and teaching them how to grow vegetables and cover their Anderson shelters with climbing roses. And the gardens that open are mostly private gardens, and it's all done voluntarily by the garden owners.
But this is a tragedy, isn't it? Because not only is it very sad for the people who visit those gardens, who get a lot of enjoyment out of them, but perhaps even more importantly, and perhaps you'll tell us, how much in a normal year you would raise for those very valuable health charities.
Well, I mean, it's absolutely devastating, basically, because we normally give away something in the region of £3 million to our health and nursing charities, which include people like the Queen's Nursing Institute and Carers Trust, and people who are very, very much in need of our money at the moment. 90% of our income comes from our garden opening, so it's absolutely devastating for us this year. And in Gloucestershire alone, last year we raised £128,000 from 75 gardens.
That's
and we
amazing.
were going to have 78 open this year, so we were hoping to have an even more bumper year. And particularly this spring, I mean, it's been such a glorious spring. The sun shone solidly, so we would have had a bumper spring.
Well, we'll come back to you and hear a little bit more about that, but that is really tragic. Justin, could you tell us a little bit about your travel business, please?
Yes, thank you to Geoffrey for inviting me on the panel. We are Steps Travel, one of the UK's leading specialist outbound operators. We have a team of 46 based in Cirencester, whose knowledge is second to none. We have a very loyal database, many of whom are here in the Cotswolds. And our sector, I think, was one of the first to be affected by coronavirus. We had clients traveling in Southeast Asia to say that they were tested and temperature checked throughout everywhere they went. With the one exception of when they came back to the UK, to Heathrow. We, like many within the travel industry, have availed ourselves of the so-called job retention scheme and furloughed 80% of our team. And whilst that's great in the short term, it's not the answer. I think what we in the travel industry need to avoid job losses is a way out. We need more than hope. We need timeframes, and I think we need consistency of messaging and clarity of leadership, which I'm afraid both are lacking at the moment.
Well, we'll certainly come back to that. That's very helpful introduction, Justin. Thank you very much. And we have Julia Sibun from Sibun Events. Julia, tell us a little bit about what you do. I think you may be on mute. You may be on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you, Sir Geoffrey. I've lived in the Cotswolds since 1994, and in 2000 I took a decision to become self-employed and run my own wedding and party planning business. This proved to be a very good decision, as the Cotswolds is a thriving area for weddings and various celebrations. People travel from all over the United Kingdom to come and celebrate in the United Kingdom, particularly people from London wanting to get married in the county. We also have a fantastic number of venues and outside event suppliers. My business comes mainly through word of mouth, and at the beginning of the year, it looked to be a bumper year with 27 weddings and parties booked. My awareness of COVID-19 started as early as mid-February, when a client moved their wedding from May to June next year. And since that time, I've had 16 events cancel or postpone in April, May, June and July. And at the present time, my clients in August, September and October are holding on to their dates in the hope that some guidelines might change.
This is one of the tragedies of this whole thing, isn't it? Youngsters who were expecting to have all that excitement of getting married and other celebrations that you're organising have had to cancel them. Do you think most of them will postpone them till the autumn, or what is going to happen to all those poor people who've postponed their events?
Originally, we were going to be postponing to later in the year, but as we've run through getting close to the summer months, people are now moving to 2021. And I'm in fact advising a lot of clients now to have Plan B up their sleeves and have all suppliers in line, ready to move to a new date next year, just to avoid big disappointments this year at the moment.
So, Steve Collins, I was reading your paper very late last night. So I know you're very much focused on the recovery for the county. Would you like to introduce yourself and just say a little bit about your thoughts in your paper of your plans for the recovery for Gloucestershire in this sector in Gloucestershire?
Yeah, good afternoon, Sir Geoffrey. I'll try and surmise 50 pages in a minute. But yeah, Steve Gardner-Collins, I'm chair of the Visit Gloucestershire partnership, which incorporates many of our existing destination marketing organisations, the Gloucestershire County Council, G1st LEP, and the private sector. And it's the combination of the two working together at this stage as part of a recovery plan. And I chair the Visitor Economy and Tourism Business Group for G1st LEP, and therefore it's a county-wide initiative. The recovery plan covers the 8 divisions set about earlier on this year. The sector came together in January, and as such we wanted to collaborate and work together across many parts of the sector, from trade, digital, visitor economy, business sector, business tourism, agritourism, food and drink supply. And that's all coming together nicely now as part of our recovery plan in conjunction with Gloucestershire County Council and the LEP itself.
So one of the things I wanted to sort of focus on in the next sort of theme, as it were, and so I'll stick with you, is this business of recovery. And I don't know whether you were able to hear my opening speech, but I used those figures that some estimate that the sector, tourism, leisure, is worth about £1 billion a year to the Cotswolds economy, and with 38 million visits. That's just to the Cotswolds, that's not the whole of Gloucestershire. So what, in your view, is the short-term damage, and how are we going to pick it up to make sure we recover as soon as possible?
Short-term damage in the respect of obviously tourists not coming to the area, the impacts on the businesses themselves and our colleagues that work across the sector in hotels, attractions, and all of them having mostly been furloughed, the implications of also getting jobs in supermarkets as a temporary fix. The short term, be it that we're sitting in a stage at the moment where we're not quite sure when we're going back to normal. The 4th of July for the sector in general appears to be the date we're all working towards. And in conjunction with our hotelier groups and our attraction groups and all the different businesses in the sector, we're working on plans on how you can reopen, minimise risk, and what reopening may look like between now and towards the autumn, given that that's the early indication of guidelines that we've got with the social distancing, and also how we go about operating our businesses in a as safe environment as we can make them.
So, Dominic, as the leading theatre critic for the Telegraph, what is the sort of long-term damage, do you think? Do you think that most theatres will be able to reopen when they're allowed to, or do you think there is a significant number that have been so badly hit financially that they will never reopen?
Well, that is the sort of $64 million question, in the sense that we are now literally dangling over the cliff edge. I think when I say we, the theatre sector, that's become a really pronounced howl of anxiety in the last fortnight. with I mean, the clock has always been ticking, but I think the question as to whether the theatres can reopen is now down to these very fine details of whether allowances can be made at some level for the sector to get its doors back open, and whether there's going to be additional government money on top of those really, really excellent schemes like the furloughing scheme to ensure that they don't hemorrhage so much cash, which they're all doing, these major theatres. We're talking about the National Theatre having to draw up huge redundancy plans. There's unprecedented levels of disquiet, and the prospect raised this week that 1,000 theatres in the country may go dark, many of them permanently, by the end of the year if there isn't a sort of very decent stopgap solution. So in a way, I think there's so much goodwill and energy waiting in the wings. But for the first time in my critical career, I'm starting to wonder whether, if people at the top of the chain take their eye off the ball too much at this critical moment, we may end up with unforetold consequences of irreparable damage. So yeah, it's all to play for in the next fortnight, I'd say.
Well, I'd love to examine that in a little more detail, and of course we are doing a separate piece after this panel. So let's hold some of the questions that you raised there. But 1,000 theatres never reopening, it sounds to me pretty dire. Could we please perhaps come to Justin and tell us a little bit about the effect on your business as such, and whether you think that, at least for the rest of the year, a lot of these people in the Cotswolds, I think, are relying on the fact that people might not be able to travel abroad. So perhaps come towards the end of the year that they may make more money because people will have staycations. Do you think that's realistic? And what is the effect on your business of that possibly happening?
I think it's realistic that as and when people start travelling, it will be domestic and regional. So from a domestic UK front and a Cotswold front, I think it will be good. But I think that the government need to, as I said, show clarity and leadership over some of these issues. For us, we're going to be one of the last sectors to come out because of things like the 2-week quarantine and the inconsistency of messaging coming out from government. But I think that we're speaking to all our clients, trying to get them to postpone, a bit like Julie was saying with her clients, to 2021. The majority of them have been very understanding about that and are doing so. But I think that there will be maybe limited travel in Q4, but we're really looking at 2021.
So, Julia, just to come, that leads me into nicely and what you were saying previously, that you think a lot of your clients are thinking about postponing their events, or having had to postpone their events, and maybe still postponing even once the lockdown is eased, and have the full sort of season in 2021. Are you in touch with all your venues to see how they can plan as best as possible, perhaps to increase the number of events that they're able to accommodate to deal with this problem?
I am in touch with the venues, yes, Sir Geoffrey, and there's one problem that they're all experiencing at the moment, is that they are not allowed to undertake any viewings, even at a social distance at the moment. So even though they're receiving many, many inquiries for 2021, they are not allowed to show people over and strike a deal, as it were. So I just wondered whether consideration could be given for viewings to start taking place under social distancing, to allow 21 and 22 bookings to start taking place.
I think that's a really good idea. Perhaps we could take this offline, and perhaps you could email me, and I will take that up with DCMS. But I think I see no reason when it could be largely 1-to-1, couldn't it? Or one perhaps Absolutely. To 2, if it was a principle of the business and say the couple themselves involved in the wedding. No reason why they shouldn't be able to perfectly well socially distance, have a good viewing of the venue, and having a discussion about the terms.
Yes.
So I think that would be useful.
Thank you.
And you obviously do a range of events. Some of them will be in established buildings, some of them will be in marquees, all sorts of events. Are some of these venues going to come back quicker than others? And have you got planned a lot of events towards the end of this year, rather like Justin was saying, actually perhaps more events at the end in Q4 than you would normally have?
Yes, a number of my clients are actually pushing to later in the year, and they're not afraid to go for a winter wedding because they simply are tired of planning. and they really just want to get a date in the diary later in the year and not take it into next year. I feel that a lot of the venues will fall by the wayside this year. I would, from my experience, just talking to them, I think we may lose up to a third of our wedding venues this year, as approximately 165,000 weddings have been displaced. So, but yes, the clients are moving to the end of the year, if not early spring next year.
So let's just be very clear about what you said there. When you said you think you'll lose a third of your wedding venues, does that mean permanently or just for this year while they get themselves sorted out?
I think we'll lose a third of them permanently because simply the income is not coming in. And as I've said, they're not allowed to show the venue off for future weddings at the moment.
So that would be really good to be able to show them so that we could get some firm bookings into their
Absolutely.
calendar. It would help them with their bank or whatever, wouldn't it?
Well, then if they were able to show people over the venues, deposits could be paid immediately to secure the venue, and then there's an immediate cash flow coming in.
Yes, indeed. Vanessa, I mean, you are in the unfortunate position of clearly there's a time imperative on what you do. Have you any thoughts at all? Do you think you'll be able to salvage any of this year as it gets towards the autumn, sort of late summer and early autumn? Or by then have a lot of the gardens actually been past their best?
Well, yes, indeed. I mean, that is part of the problem. And basically, we've had a two-pronged approach. You've asked me to come on this programme partly because the National Garden Scheme, although it's a charitable foundation, is actually effectively a tourist company. We are a tourist firm. We are encouraging people to come, and we want people to come and visit our gardens. So what we've had to do is to change very rapidly from being a tourist company to being a campaigning organisation. So one of the things we have been doing is actually getting films of our gardens. We're getting the garden owners to take films of their gardens, and we've been putting them up online, so that people can go have virtual tours of the gardens at the season that they're best. And we've got them on our main website, which is ngs.org.uk. And we then encourage people to donate, having looked at the garden and asked them to give the kind of money that they would have paid to come in and have tea. Our other approach, of course, is that we are looking to open some of our gardens later in the year, under very strict criteria, pre-booked tours, pre-booked online, time slots like galleries, the numbers allowed in determined by the garden owners, and a pre-planned route around the garden so that social distancing can be observed. We're looking for doing that from the beginning of July, and many of our garden owners are quite enthusiastic. But one of the sadnesses is, of course, that we'll really only be able to do that in the big gardens. And one of the things that people like very much about the National Garden Scheme is seeing small gardens that are more like their own, where they can get ideas. And what we are waiting on, our Chief Executive, George Plumtree, has written, along with the National Trust, the Royal Horticultural Society and Kew, to the government asking for clarification, because obviously at the moment we've got plans afoot, but we can't make those firm until we know whether what restrictions are going to be relaxed and how they're going to be relaxed.
I absolutely take that point, and hopefully people who do your virtual tours will be generous with their donations. Because
well, so far we've raised over £67,000 on the central website. We've actually raised almost £600 in Gloucestershire. We've been contacting the people. But one of the nice things about visiting a National Garden Scheme garden is that you have a tea, lemon drizzle cake being the particular charm of the visit. And so we've been contacting the people who've helped us to open our gardens, supporters who bake cakes or come and help serve them, and ask them if they instead of baking a cake, give the price of their cake ingredients. So that's helped us to earn some money.
I suppose the message that you would like to go out today from this panel is that your charities are still just as much in need of the money as they ever were, probably even more so.
I mean, much more so. Say we were going to be giving away £3 million this year. Obviously, we can't do that. And Marie Curie, the Queen's Nursing Institute, Hospice UK, Carers Trust, they're all charities who are desperately in need of any money we can give them.
So I suppose your plea today was, please do the virtual tours, but then be doubly generous with your donations once you've done.
Absolutely. And this week there's a Gloucestershire garden up on the website too, Ramblers near Lydney. So
fantastic.
So I would encourage all local people to look at that, and when they get a chance, go and see it next year.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. That's very helpful. So, Steve, you've heard from our panelists how the sector is in such deep trouble. Have you any sort of real tips or messages for businesses in Gloucestershire, many of whom must be in utter despair at the moment, some on the edge not knowing whether they're going to open again or not? What sort of message have you got for those people?
Times are incredibly challenging, and I've actually, my main role, Sir Geoffrey, is I'm sales director for a hotel group. We've got 7 hotels and 2 pubs, 5 of which are in the Cotswolds, and we are equally closed and furloughed. I'm optimistic that from the 4th of July we have that date, and we can work towards that by way of reopening our businesses and looking to the future. What I would reassure everybody is that for the last 6 to 8 weeks, there has been an awful lot of planning taking place. Education was a priority in the first instance because that will lead us up to hopefully the beginning of June. But then once we're freed up and we can start to focus on the visitor economy and the sector as a whole, we've got that time to quickly come up with some solutions. We've got PR and marketing meetings now that started yesterday ongoing, looking at how we can start to really redistribute the messages in conjunction with the government guidelines on the staycation market and generally how our local residents can stay local and take advantage of everything that's great on their doorsteps and support local businesses, local restaurants, local cafes, and really just start to move about and take advantage of the businesses being back reopened. But the planning has been going on for weeks. We are ready. And my plan particularly was very practical. I wanted to demonstrate, if I was the salesperson for Gloucestershire, this is the kind of action I would need to take in order to go back to normal. So the plan is very much a practical plan and something we can get on with as quickly as we can.
So the LEP are going to play a key part, are they not, in Gloucestershire's recovery? Because you will have some money to put behind that plan. You have the growth hubs. You give businesses advice, both large and small, particularly the small ones. Are you reasonably optimistic that through your advice and through your help, that you will be able to nurse most of those businesses back into business and help them with their banks, tide them over for this difficult period and get them into business so that they're there when the upturn comes?
Yeah, Cheltenham, Gloucester, Stroud and Tewkesbury have announced today via David at the G First about this further funding that's a bit towards June that will become available. And certainly the local authorities and the county itself are working hard to support as best they can in this case the short term, whilst businesses start to try and reopen and get that cash flow moving. I hear from my own point of view with our hotel business, we've got weddings in the pipeline for the autumn. Can they or can't they happen? Christmas is another huge period in the calendar that really supports our economy for the leisure and tourism sector. So we've got the summer coming up and we really want to take advantage of July and August as best as we can. But we really do also need to be looking into the autumn and the winter, where for places like the Forest of Dean, they went through the flooding as late as February. They had a time of moment to get back to normal, and then we're in lockdown again with the coronavirus. And therefore, across the county, we really need to do as much as we can, as soon as we can, because we're about to go into our seasonal shift, no doubt upon us, come autumn, winter. And we've then got to stretch our ability to survive, even without the virus usually, up and through until about March again.
So you were in the process, really, of writing a report, making a plan for normality of how you were going to grow the business from normal. Are you now having to alter that report, especially to try and help businesses survive from coronas and move forward?
Yeah, it is a survival at the moment, particularly in the short term. The uncertainties over the next month, given the indications from government on this monitoring of R, and also how we maintain this social distancing, the practical cases being in a restaurant. If I'm not a very big establishment and I've got to have this 2-meter radius distance for tabling, it will be incredibly difficult to open and be sustainable. And sustainability is certainly something we want to focus on now. Can businesses operate with this 2-meter distancing? Can it be reduced in line with some of the other European countries down to perhaps 1 meter? So we're still offering that distancing. I read earlier that there may even be masks from next week that will be mandatory in order to just in the short term compress this problem that we've got. That will certainly then start to help us as we go further out into July and August, and then across into September, October, to really compress the issue we've got, and then hopefully look optimistically to a brighter end to the year.
So I'm going to come into Julia next, but when I was last talking to Julia, we were on a really interesting theme about trying to find ways of getting customers to sign up with their venues so that at least they've got something on their books, they've got a cash flow anticipation. Is this something, if this asks something that would apply across a wider range of businesses rather than just Julia's visitors? The general theme of being able to get people signed up, in other words, enable a negotiation to take place through social distancing meeting and inspecting a venue, maybe a different type of business. Is this something that could apply more widely?
Is that to you, Steve?
I'm happy to answer from a hotelier's perspective. I echo Julia. I would love. Sorry,
Steve,
Sir Geoffrey.
Sorry.
I echo Julia's message on the social distancing. I would love nothing more than for our wedding coordinators to be coming back into the business and certainly gearing ourselves back up for 2021 and 2022. We are already trying to be active in the background with as much clarity as we can be on the forecasting for weddings for next year, and what would really help us to support our business and our people that work for us is to give them the certainty that although times are hard now, we can look to a brighter future, and those redundancy issues and concerns that businesses have got, which have been the highlight of my last 2 weeks in every single meeting. And I call it a highlight because I just can't describe every time somebody drops that bombshell into the meeting. It's another concern of another business that I worry about that could face closure, because we can't look too far out without certainty as to how we can actually operate in our businesses.
So Julia, I'm really thinking about that terrible statistic you gave, that you think 1/3 of your wedding venues will go out of business. Is there anything you can, as an events organizer, or maybe through Steve and the LEP, is there anything you can do to help give them advice as to how they might tide themselves over until they can operate again?
Well, it would be great to talk to Steve about that and see which venues are feeling vulnerable at the moment. The ones I've particularly spoken to are those venues that are in fact family, well, a lot of them throughout Gloucestershire and the Cotswolds are family-run businesses, because we've had so many conversions of barns and outbuildings into wedding venues. And I think these particular venues are feeling it the hardest at the moment. And as I said before, Sir Geoffrey, I just feel that if they were opened up for viewing so people could get in there and look at them and get booking for next year, I think this would help those smaller venues enormously.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Justin, tell us about your business. Are you now taking bookings for next year and for Q4? I mean, what is happening in the travel industry?
Yes is the short answer. I think we have a lot of clients who still want to travel, and we are taking bookings for either later in the year and also next year. They are a small amount at the moment, but I think the key is those who are still sceptical and unsure, those are the ones we need to try and give some certainty to. and that at the moment is difficult because I think the government is a prisoner of its own propaganda. I think Steve was talking about sort of 1 metre in Europe. The WHO also talk about 1 metre rather than 2 metre, and I think government has frightened lots of people, and they now have to stand up and try and get people back into businesses. As I said, the job retention scheme is good in the short term, but it is not the answer. It's just pushing a lot of problems further downstream, and we will see a lot of redundancies. And I was on listened to a parliamentary select committee a fortnight ago on travel, and I think a lot of the MPs on that were surprised by the fact there are going to be redundancies. They thought the job retention scheme would do what it says, i.e. keep people in jobs, and that is simply not the case at all.
No, I'm afraid that the lasting or the legacy, at least for a little while, of this whole coronavirus is going to be the increase in unemployment. And we've got, we see some figures this week of unemployment doubling in Gloucestershire from 7% to 14%, which is pretty alarming. So if you're saying to me in the travel sector, and no doubt you're all saying in your own sectors, that people are going to lose jobs, this is really one of the worrying things about the whole.
But I think because there's no time frame, there's no certainty, that businesses are going to have to make decisions now. That even though while people are on furlough, they're going to have to start thinking about redundancies, and those will start happening very soon.
And Dominic, you've given us those alarming statistics that you don't think, you think that 1,000 theatres may go under. That presumably is an awful lot of talent and energy and everything else that's going to disappear. What can we do? What could the government do? And it's presumably not just the theatre sector, it's ballet, it's opera and every sort of other entertainment venues. What could the government do to help ease the pain in that sector?
Really, obviously, a very good question. I mean, in a sense, what's interesting listening to other panelists is the idea that there is this sort of government timescale. I mean, obviously, the government is trying to do things as quickly as it can, bringing in data, distributing new methods to deal with the virus. But each sector has a different time frame. And what's really acutely apparent at the moment with theatre, and I know it's going to, obviously, all these sectors are in crisis, but with theatre, they have these particular rhythms of kind of revenue generation. And for many, particularly regional theatres, a crucial time of their kind of bank gathering moments are kind of the pantos and the Christmas shows, and we're now in this very peculiar phase where furloughing looks like it's going to be extended probably to October, I think. But some of these theatres are having to make really tough calls about what happens beyond that. So there's a lot of guesswork going on. Guesswork is fatal, I think, for trying to create the momentum necessary to open productions. So it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. I think the government really needs to very, very swiftly announce a more major allowance for theatre and the performing arts to the end of the year, which would give that sector the kind of breathing space it needs to not dip further into its reserves so it's reaching closure crisis point, and it has enough energy and funding to start pushing forward again once we start emerging from the whole lockdown and social distancing mode. And I think that's the problem with theatre, is it takes 3 months or so for something to kind of move forward. Sets have got to be built, casts have got to be recruited. You have this very floating kind of workforce. And once they're all sort of orbiting with nothing to latch onto, with very little income support or guarantees of income, they start to sort of dissipate. And then the entire ecosystem of theatre begins to disintegrate. And you can't just reassemble it. That's the problem. It's a very, very mortal and human activity. And of course, there are lots of comparable issues with the retail and the leisure sector elsewhere. But it's absolutely fundamental, I think, that somehow, rather than this sort of month-by-month approach that we've seen so far from the government, there's a bit more of a leap in the dark towards, as it were, the beacon of hope. And the government goes, you know what, we understand these anxieties and are crippling you. We would rather remove some of those and give you a longer breathing space. And from that, you can start getting, I think, some sustained planning. But at the moment, I'm talking to people who, they seem to have 8 possible plans on the go. They have productions that are stalled, might be brought back in, and all that adds a kind of not just uncertainty, but a kind of accrued cost. So I think Christmas is obviously crucial. It would be fantastic if the government worked towards encouraging theatres to make real strides to opening by December. But that's not even going to happen in this current climate, because I think a lot of theatres are pulling the plug already on what they think they can do. And if you've got your flagship theatres like the National drawing up, redundancy plans, you've got theatres in Edinburgh like the Lyceum mothballing, you're going to have I suppose, as I say, kind of a vicious circle of decline very rapidly. And as Sonia Friedman, the West End producer, said in the Telegraph this week, it is potentially irrecoverable. And I'm not sure the government gets that. I don't see a lot of tweets.
Well,
Dominic,
Dominic,
I haven't seen any tweets really from Oliver Dowden.
You and I are going to do a one-to-one interview in a minute. Let us explore that in a little bit greater detail when we come to that one-to-one interview. What I'm anxious now to concentrate on from all of our contributors is we can all drive ourselves into an early grave and think that this whole thing will be the end of the world. But what I'd like each of you individually to tell me, this is a great country, it's got a lot of talent, it's got some very energetic youngsters, a very entrepreneurial country, a forward-thinking country. Every business, I'm sure, every principal in a business will be thinking carefully how they can run their business more productively in future. What I'd like to hear from you individually is where is the optimism in all this? There's got to be some optimism where we can all individually help the upturn. So I'm going to start with you, Vanessa, and ask what your optimistic theme is for next year.
Well, I mean, the advantage, of course, is that gardens are cyclical, and the flowers will come back next year as they were there this year. We're a voluntary organisation, so we're not facing some of the issues that, for example, Justin's been talking about. We have volunteers who are very keen to open their gardens again. So, all being well, we should be able to get back to some kind of normality next year. But obviously, it'll have been a very bad year indeed for our charities this year.
Can I make one suggestion to you? I love going around gardens, and I've been around lots of gardens under your scheme. But I can't recall an occasion where I've been round a garden and actually come away thinking, oh, yes, I've contributed to such and such a charity. Maybe where you have the teas, you could somehow promote those charities that you're raising so much money for, and that would have two effects. It would tell the individual visitor what they've contributed to, and actually, if they felt really inclined to be sympathetic with that charity, they might give a bigger donation.
Well, we do encourage our garden owners. We do have big posters with lists of the people to whom we contribute, and we always have collecting boxes. Maybe you haven't been lucky enough to see one of those big posters, but we certainly encourage our garden owners to take them and put them up and have them by the teas. I always have one. I have my garden. I always have one by the gate and one by the plant sales, so that people get a good chance to look at where their money is going to.
Right. When I next hear your garden is open, I shall come and look at your garden with Kim, and we will look for that poster, and then we'll talk to you about it. Julia, what's your optimistic note for next year?
I think the wonderful thing about the world of outside events is that we're a very close-knit group of suppliers, and we all work very closely together and help each other out all the time. So I believe that we will be moving heaven and earth to enable all our clients to have the dates they want in the future, and we'll work together as a team to make those days happen and be successful at it. And in addition, the furlough scheme, the bounce back loan, business interruption loan schemes have all helped the outside event suppliers this year, for which I know everyone is extremely grateful.
And are you in touch with all your venues as to say, well, this is what you do, but have you thought about doing so and so and so to try and actually up your game on each venue? As I said, my great theme during this lockdown period is to think how I can do things better. Are you encouraging your venues to do that?
I am, yes. We are looking at various ways to hold the events, even if we're thinking of having them, if they've got the areas, having the ceremonies or the weddings outside under awnings and with informal seating, and perhaps having picnic hampers as food, and looking at various ways that we might be able to undertake some celebrations with social distancing. So there are regular groups coming together just to see if we can be very inventive.
Justin, what's your optimistic note for next year for your customers who want to travel?
Well, riding the COVID coaster, sometimes there's pessimism and optimism, but you've asked for optimism. I'd say similar to Julia, that it's collaboration. I think there's been a huge amount of collaboration between us and our competitors, the travel industry coming together to try and find solutions. And I welcome you, Sir Geoffrey, for doing panels such as this. But I hope that government does that more collaboration, actually speaks to small and medium-sized businesses a lot more than it does at the moment. I think it speaks to bigger companies, but not necessarily to our size companies, and to have that ear to the ground, because I think in the end we're the engine room for the recovery, and that collaboration with government and local governments would be great.
But presumably you as an industry, the travel industry, have been out round, probably virtually, round the world, scouting out new venues. For those that want to travel and are able to travel, hopefully if coronavirus allows next year, there's going to be huge opportunities, aren't there?
I think there will be huge opportunities, but I think there will also be change. I think that this crisis has accelerated and fast-forwarded lots of trends, such as sustainability, slow travel, more meaningful travel. Hopefully there'll be less mass tourism, which I think is a bad, but tourism and travel can be such a force for good. And I think it's trying to harness all of that and drop some of the negatives of the likes of mass tourism.
And do you think that people will, like me, be thinking about their travel and think very carefully about their air miles and everything else? And perhaps will there be a permanent change in behaviour of people travelling less around the world and spending more time of the huge opportunities there are in the UK?
Yes, I think so. I think that I think it's opened people's eyes and ears to what's around them here. People spending time in their gardens. Everybody's talking about listening to nature, birdsong, etc. I think for international travel, I think you're right. It will change. We will travel less, and we will hopefully travel more slowly. But I think it's a real opportunity for us to get that right. And you raised the question about air miles. And again, I think that's climate change is a bigger curve that we also need to flatten and look at further down the line once we're out of this.
Thank you. And Steve, what's your sort of optimistic note for next year?
Our sector is incredibly passionate, Sir Geoffrey. That's what's definitely come through over the last. We've all worked together in the last several weeks of this lockdown, and I believe that the keenness on passion is certainly going to see us through. Visit Gloucestershire, for example, is that collaborative approach. Our partners and our new partners that are coming on board are coming together to work optimistically for a better future for Gloucester. It's hashtag Gloucestershire together. It's all those divisions working together. And actually, just to support what Justin is saying, we sent a survey out to our trade contacts, and we received feedback from Los Angeles and Florida and other parts of America, Europe and other parts of Asia all this week, saying from about May next year, we would really like to start bringing our visitors back to your county. So let's start talking now about how we can get those itineraries and that business on the books. So I am optimistic, because everyone's optimistic, because we're all very passionate, and I think we're all social creatures at heart. We're all desperate to get out. We will be going to our local restaurants, our bars, and we will be wanting people to come and stay in our hotels. We love nothing more in the Cotswolds than to see people enjoying the space where we choose to live. And I think if we can just get that balance right with the numbers of people coming to visit and make it more sustainable and more enjoyable for everybody, then we can think optimistically for the future.
So I gave those very big numbers at the beginning of my speech. Can I just make a plea that the Cotswolds is the powerhouse of tourism in Gloucestershire? Your report, as it was written, and I'm no doubt you'll be writing a new report, only mentioned the Cotswolds twice. Can we keep promoting the Cotswolds? It's really, really important that we do.
Yeah, I agree with you. Cotswolds is the brand, and definitely we don't want over-tourism in these honeypot locations. We want people to come and experience all of the parts of Gloucestershire, spread everybody out, and then it creates longer length of stay. We've got a very short length of stay in this area, where it's 1 or 2 nights. If we can create reasons to come and stay for several nights, then people can experience the whole of the county and drift between all the great places that we have to offer, and not just saturate the same old places that really will struggle and have struggled in the past.
So it's really joined up tourism, making sure that the railways join up with the bicycle hires, but join up with the pubs, the bed and breakfast, and trying to raise tourism up the value chain.
Absolutely, you're spot on.
Thank you. Dominic, we're going to go into our one-to-one interview in a minute, but let's end this session with an optimistic note from you. I mean, would you not agree that we have fantastic talent in this country to perform these shows? We have fantastically entrepreneurial organisations like the Barn that are continually trying to improve their offering. Don't you think that actually the arts ultimately is going to come out stronger from this coronavirus?
I fervently hope so, and I do think that's the case. That the industry that I've had the privilege to, spectate on for so many years is unbelievably resourceful and resilient and light on its feet. And I was asked recently to try and speculate where we would be in a year's time for the Telegraph, and I couldn't really bring myself to be that pessimistic, because I sort of have a confidence that the government will get it, and also have a belief that the people in the heart of Theatreland are so articulate and kind of problem solving, they'll get around those hurdles. And I think that, we ended up, I sort of consulted SALT, the leading sort of West End Theatre Association. They were saying, we think things could be back to normal this time next year, touch wood. And I sort of believe that. And in a way, I think what you've said is right. Things could be better. We could have a better understanding of how valuable communal theatre is, what those civic spaces mean to us socially. And, from things like Clap for Carers onwards, and the digital kind of adventures we've been seeing, I think there's an appetite to celebrate our humanity in a way that there probably hasn't been for 10, 15 years. It feels as though since the financial crash, things steadied and maybe got a bit sort of complacent. I think there's never going to go back to those days. Drama's here. Drama's going to come back in a big way, I think.
Dominic, you've opened up an awful lot of themes, which we can examine in a little bit more detail in a little while. But can I, at this point, thank all of our panellists very much. I think we've had a fascinating discussion today. I would simply end by let's be optimistic. Let's be generous with our time and advice, and try, all of us in positions of authority, one way or another, or influence, to help our smaller businesses get through this very difficult time and be stronger for when the upturn comes. So I think you've contributed fantastically to that theme today. Thank you all very much. Thank you. David, over to you.
Thank you, Sir Geoffrey. Just quickly, I'd like to share with you a couple of live streams. From Catherine Taylor, she says, incredibly informative and interesting as usual. And each week we do get feedback from live streams saying that the idea of having question time and choosing a theme for the week does work. But on the other side of the coin, we obviously have people who are keen to ask you as their MP questions. And I'd like to apologise for those people who feel that we haven't devoted enough time to that, and we will certainly endeavour to get that balance right. But I think it's important to say that whereas 10 weeks ago when we first sat here, there were more questions than answers, we now have a situation where the questions are more refined. They're not necessarily about where people can get their grants, and I think the government and locally have done a fantastic job making money available. But it's an ongoing process, and we are trying to get the balance right. So for Steve and Amanda Jane, who are streaming away saying, can we get to the questions, let's hit you with another couple of questions.
Right.
All right?
Delighted.
Rachel Greater X Jones, her concern is that COVID-19 is wreaking havoc on the British farmers, and that she's concerned they may be dealt with a second blow by being undercut by cheaper, lower food produce, such as chlorine-washed chicken from America, and that Minette Batters, NFU president, has stressed the need for government to take all possible steps to stop a no-deal Brexit. Could you enlighten us on that theme? The idea that, all that good stuff we heard last week about the excellent local and British food that we enjoy, that somehow left field we're going to be hit by cheaper produce again.
Well, Rachel, I'm a farmer, and I haven't spent the years that I've been producing produce hopefully at a higher and higher standard each year. I grow potatoes for McDonald's, I grow potatoes for all sorts of people, and the standards, believe it or not, that McDonald's want in terms of tracing and freshness are unbelievably high. And I don't think that anybody, whether it's in the arable sector or whether it's in the livestock sector, wants to see those standards drop. And we have some of the highest standards in the world in the United Kingdom, and there is no reason why that shouldn't continue, even if we do a free trade agreement with America. Now, I don't know eventually what the details of that free trade agreement are, but I think what you do ultimately, if you have very high standards, you're able to advertise those British high standards, and those people, the consumer, who's making the choice of which of the goods to buy, whether it's of high standards or of lower standards at a cheaper price, is then able to make a decision. And I think the really important thing is that we, British farmers, should keep those high standards and keep marketing that fact, how wholesome, how good, how fresh, and what high standards our food is.
Okay, one more question, because Dominic's ready to have the one-on-one interview, and we're all keen to hear that. But this is from Steve Jones, who's been incredibly patient with his question. This dates back to last week. His concern is that there will be a spike, and that spike could well be in 2 to 3 weeks' time. And the lockdown, which affects not just farming, it affects the sector that we've just been talking about. The lockdown should not have been eased until we had a full test trace system in place, as the WHO head of Europe said in his interview with various reputable media owners. Do you have a view? Because I know you've been passionate in trying to restart the economy, but the other word that's uppermost in your mind is to do it safely and to do it healthily, and you really have been leading that charge. Do you think we've got that balance wrong or right?
So, David, I have been absolutely steadfast in everything that I've said on this whole matter about getting businesses back to work in the last month, that it's got to be done with health and safety in mind. And I do think that tracking and tracing is really important. And the critical part of that, or two critical parts really, one is the testing, so that actually when people demonstrate symptoms, they can be quickly tested. And the other thing is the app, so that we can quickly trace all those people who've been anywhere near that person who's contracted the disease and make sure that they socially isolate and therefore don't pass it on to another lot of people. And I think that is important. I explained at the beginning of the programme the difficulty of that process, the ramping up of the capacity. I'm sure we're doing that at huge pace and we will continue to do it. But equally, I think if we are too cautious about lifting the lockdown, we will do damage to our industries. And I do think that our schools need to begin to get back, and I'm very clear in my opening remarks, from the 1st of June. That doesn't mean they are back on the 1st of June. I think they need to begin to think about how to do it, and hopefully at the same time the capacity of the testing and tracing will increase so that most people in most businesses, in most ways of life, can get a test when they need it.
Okay. Just before I hand back to you to have your interview with Dominic, and thank you, Dominic, for being so patient. Just one point that's been raised by a viewer. She's asking the question, it's not a question of you, it's a question of where we are in terms of the technology. Are the discussions from previous weeks available to watch somewhere? I've had trouble connecting on occasion. There seem to be some internet issues today, for which we can only apologise. It's not down to us or down to the Barn Theatre, but there are people coming on stream, which is great. All the previous 10 programmes that Sir Geoffrey has run are available on the Barn Theatre, and they're available on your Facebook page as well. All you have to do is go to the Barn Theatre and you'll see them there, ready and available, and they're permanently there for you to look at some of the previous debates. But it's nice to know that people want to look at the previous discussions as well. So can I hand back to you, Sir Geoffrey, to have your discussions with Dominic, and then we're going to carry on the few questions, because we did give a commitment to our viewers that we would make sure we were up to date on the questions before the programme ends.
Well, you know, I always enjoy answering questions.
You certainly do.
I never shirk or duck any questions. So please keep sending the questions, comments on what we're doing, if you like it, if you don't like it, but also questions are really important. So Dominic, to get back to you, it's really good to have you on the programme, and I am really, really grateful, and we're honoured to have you. Just sort of tell us, I think we don't hear enough about the sort of state of people's well-being that is caused by the performing arts. It's a really important part, is it not, in many people's lives?
Absolutely. And I think there's been a kind of withdrawal syndrome with a lot of people who go to the theatre, sometimes not that regularly, but just go a couple of times a year. And it's a sort of huge touchstone for them in terms of their sense of connection with the performing arts, being taken out of themselves, coming into a different kind of space. And I was really struck when I really sensed that the government was probably poised to close the theatres. In the wake of the closures on Broadway, I went up and down Shaftesbury Avenue on what proved to be the final Saturday matinee, and I spoke to maybe half a dozen people coming out of those matinees, and we talked about, you know, why they'd come, whether they were worried about turning up, because by that point, of course, people were getting very concerned. And really, every single person I spoke to had a sort of joy and an energy and a commitment to theatre that almost shamed me as a hardened hack. You know, there they were, they'd paid a lot of money, they wouldn't have missed these shows for the world, and they were already quite devastated by the thought that Shaftesbury Avenue might go dark, and they didn't really want to accept that fact. And I think, in a weird way, I hold on to that, I cling on to that as a really strong sign that the British, if one can generalize, are performing arts people. They love, they have terrible weather, but they like congregating, often in interiors, and celebrating their lives. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of statistics bandied about the attendance figures, and James Graham, the playwright, on Question Time, saying, you know, it is a fact that more people go to theatre in this country than go to football matches. And I think that's, you know, we love football. So I think that gives you an indication of how important it is, and in a sense, how collectively we mourn its absence.
But isn't this part of this sort of optimism that I was talking about? If people can look forward to the performing arts, and it's not just theatre, as we were saying earlier, it's ballet, it's opera, it's a whole range of performing arts, literary festivals and so on. If people can look forward to that returning next year, which is why really the government ought to be supporting it, they can look forward to that, they can look forward with a sense of optimism. It will do an awful lot for their well-being and mental state to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting about the time that we're in now is that quite often we'd be venturing outdoors anyway as theatre goers. And of course, you know, I'm sorry to keep on going about theatre. I do realise that for many people, they are passionate about opera and dance and so on. And I think, you know, I take my hat off to all those performers in those disciplines as well. And in some ways, some of them have had a really tough time, you know, because they're looking at, particularly in dance, the most, you know, how do you do social distancing in dance? You can just about imagine a theatre landscape for a time being that sort of operates on stage with some kind of distancing. But dance obviously is a very different kettle of fish. But I do think that the outdoor spaces that we have in this country and our willingness to go outdoors to experience the arts is I think is the great moment to seize. And I would, in a way, urge the government to look at its sort of formulations. It was looking at the post-Brexit landscape and trying to encourage people to celebrate the arts after Brexit. And in a way, I think it needs to translate some of that thinking to reconnecting people, as it were, in this post-lockdown, post-COVID moment, in a way almost harking back to the Olympics in 2012, where there was a great sense of possibility in the outdoor arenas that we don't normally use. And I think that's something that would be hugely appreciated if money was found and heads were banged together to start plotting a course whereby you may not be able to go to your local theatre, but in the vicinity or in certain locations, you start to see quite soon activity. And I think the Barn is incredible because it's already talking amid this terrible crisis of producing a sort of drive-in theatre experience, which would be pioneering, would be absolutely morale boosting and trailblazing, when I think would point up the fact that, you know, with the will, with the way, you can create things that we wouldn't have dreamt of seeing 12 months ago. So I'm a natural optimist, and I do think that's absolutely right. We should be foremost optimists, but also pragmatically, we have to start hammering louder on the door of government to say, what are you actually going to do over the next 6 months to prevent totally needless catastrophe?
So the Barnes halo is growing today, but one of the other things that they're very good at is interacting with young people with what the schools are doing, providing apprenticeships and so on. Let's talk about young people, because I think that the offering that schools are now giving in the arts is so much more enlightened and informed than it was when I was at school, but probably when you were at school as well. And it's young people that are really driving the arts, it seems to me, this day, because they've got the energy and the creativity. That's where new talent is coming from.
Absolutely, and you know, I caused a bit of a rumpus on Twitter when I suggested really quite early on in the crisis that one possible solution, I mean, I admit there are huge kind of scientific and medical ramifications, but one possible interesting moment for British theatre might be that whilst we obviously have to protect and look after those who are in the older demographic, that we really reach out to those younger members of the population, school age, a little bit beyond that, and say, you know, these spaces which are to some extent a bit out of bounds probably for the older generation could become yours for a while. Don't know how we do that, but I certainly think this is a kind of great moment to start thinking outside the box about how young people who often love performance and the whole rigmarole around that can be encouraged into those spaces now, if possible. And I agree with you. In some ways, when I was growing up, and I did a small piece about Michael Morpurgo's Shakespeare books the other day for the Telegraph. When I was growing up, I don't want to, you know, belittle my education. It was a fantastic one, but you know, we were plonked in front of the BBC's Shakespeare series on the Doddery VHS, and you know, obviously, there's no substitute for sitting in a theatre. But I do think even in the digital sphere, in the last 5 years, we've seen an absolute explosion of content, of interactivity, and also of access, so that some of the best shows made in the last decade are there at the touch of a button for youngsters. And I do think that's a testament to how outward-looking, forward-thinking a lot of those people in the sector are. And their minds are always half on the community outreach education, as much as it is on artistic excellence and those sorts of rare hits, I think. And that's, again, one of the great casualties at the moment, that you know, they're all plowing a lot of energy into education, but God help them if they can't continue that, because that'll be another arm of British theatre that can't reach out to the population.
So internationally, the whole world has really suffered under this coronavirus, and various countries are blaming various other countries, and some are saying they've come out of lockdown too soon, some are saying that they didn't adopt strict enough measures. But the arts knows no boundaries. It's a great way of making friends and linking arms across the world, is it not? And the UK has been particularly good at welcoming talent from all over the globe. And is that not an important thing that we need to be doing going forward? Making friends all over the place.
Yes, I think there's been a strange kind of solidarity that's emerged just in theatre alone, you know, in terms of the sense of kindred experience. You know, you look to Germany, you see they're modelling in a way, quite a sort of tragic way, they're modelling those sorts of socially distanced audiences. But I think that they're learning from each other, they're speaking to each other. The backstage dialogue that's going on within the industry, and I imagine further afield, is phenomenal. No one is sitting around sort of waiting for the theatres to reopen. There is this sort of absolute frenzy of activity. But internationalism is important, and in some ways, I think as we look at what we've built up over the last 20 years, particularly, but obviously it goes right back to the post-war consensus. As we look at the creative industry and the creative sector, which obviously theatre contributes to massively, we need to say those Netflix series that now reach everyone around the world, whether it's, you know, Ricky Gervais or Fleabag. Often they're seeded in minor little kind of fringe spaces. We need to start reminding ourselves of those connection points, so that something in Battersea might reach Beijing or something. We need to start realizing how important we are to that sort of global cultural conversation. And I think maybe it's something that could be discussed in the sort of blue sky thinking areas of government. We have at the moment a lot of debate that recurs about the licence fee and the BBC and its role. And I would like to just throw out there the suggestion that going forward, we start to look at the performing arts and the live sector as in some ways it could be there as a kind of closer cousin of the broadcasting universe, because already there's a kind of hybridity emerging in terms of broadcast, film, theatre. And I think this could be a reset moment where we start to go, could that, we've seen a lot of theatre companies, practitioners, places like the Barn, they're not really inside the Arts Council loop. They contribute. Can we find another way in which nationally, maybe it's something like the license fee, comes in as a new means of supporting, financing, and exploring possibility? And I would love that sort of kind of intersection between industry figures at this moment, because it feels like a sort of crisis. But from that, we could come up with some really new, exciting propositions, I think.
Fantastic idea, really good, innovative ideas. Now, we started when we were talking on the panel of being pessimistic about those 1,000 theatres that might never reopen. But actually, isn't there a really good market out there for companies like the Barn, indeed from the small ones like the Barn right up to the big ones like the National, to put on innovative new slants on old plays, new plays? Isn't there going to be a pent-up demand from people to actually want to go and view those, whether they're indoors or outdoors, as soon as they're able to do so? So isn't there actually a pretty optimistic future for the performing arts sector?
Well, I think the demand will be there, but whether there'll be an industry able to supply it, because I do think it's a very finely wrought, interconnected kind of puzzle of an industry. And I think that sort of fragility of it, although it's incredibly strong, outward facing, I think with behind the scenes, a lot of things are done on, quite precarious models of pay, so on and so forth. So I do think that could be a real travesty, that you have a population going, we want to come back, and those theatres have gone dark almost accidentally. And I think key to this is the big question that I think is in a lot of people's minds about social distancing. Everyone in theatre says it's not workable, it's not artistically or economically workable to try and apply a social distancing model for theatre. And I think sooner rather than later, somebody's got to bite the bullet and go, can we at least trial quite rapidly, properly assessed, etc., proper audiences in our theatres, with all the kind of sanitation and the health checks that you might need to do, so that we can just start to get to remind ourselves that this is possible. Because I think are we maybe this is a question to you, are we social distancing in order to keep this virus in abeyance until we arrive at a vaccine, or are we just in a sense creating a social distancing model, and then we're going to morph that into more sophisticated ways of interacting? Because some producer I spoke to this afternoon said, we want the government really to start looking upon theatre more like the London Underground system. Not only is everything connected, you can't just cherry pick a station, but also you're going to have to allow people to bundle together a bit more closely. So in a way, I feel a bit in the dark still as to what is the kind of mission on social distancing. Is it a temporary stopgap, or is it really going to be with us really indefinitely until some magic wand vaccine arrives?
Well, I think that's up to the scientific and medical community to give the government advice. I mean, ultimately, that's what the government has to work on. It has to work on some of the best experts that we've got in those fields and work out what is practically possible to do versus what the dangers are. And we certainly don't want to cause another huge spike if that might happen. One of our questions referred to that. And finally, there's one other thing I want to talk about before we leave. And we've talked about the actual performances themselves. We've talked about the theatres themselves. But one group we haven't talked about is the actual writers and creators, and particularly youngsters coming along who are able to make some really innovative new ideas and creations. Are you, and that's to a degree spawned by education. Are you optimistic that actually Britain is still spawning some of the best ideas around the world?
Well, I mean, yeah, I would say that the new writing scene is I mean, maybe I'm sounding too patriotic to say this, but I do think the new writing scene is sort of second to none. There is a sort of huge number of people out there writing plays, devising plays. We seem to have this sort of attraction, Shakespeare almost to the stage, and also these other sort of, as it were, performing arenas. And writers are, incredibly young. They're nurtured young, and TV, for example, snaps them up young. So I think we've got a golden moment as well to ask that generation what it makes of this new reality, because it's going to be feeling it more acutely in a way than any of us, because it's all fresh. You know, I've got a daughter whose GCSE has been cancelled, and it has been for her, I suppose, the equivalent of the financial crash or maybe the Cold War in my generation. There are things that are going to be kind of pressing, coming out of that moment, that I think we need to listen to and encourage. And I therefore think that in some ways we're already in a new era creatively, because you couldn't simply remount the scheduled shows that we had lined up for 2020 and expect that to do justice to what we've all been through. So whether it's TikTok on one level, which I think is an underrated medium in terms of creativity, everyone is making these extraordinary videos or riffing on these tropes. From that right through to long form poetry and all those kinds of other forms of expression. I think it's going to be a case of watch this space, but I do think the government it could be really championing this. And I'd love a bit more articulation of the value of the kinds of things you've just been saying, those things from right at the top of government, saying we haven't forgotten about you, because I think a lot of those performing arts people feel a little bit like they're at the bottom of the queue, at the back of the queue at the moment.
So finally, Dominic, I'm sure you're probably like me. You've had to do an awful lot more on your computer than you would normally do, and a lot of Zoom and Skype and Microsoft for Business conference calls. Do you think that in the arts sector we will be able to use new technology? In other words, we will experiment with new ways of doing things that we perhaps had not thought of before going forward?
Well, I think if you look at the huge demand to watch NT at home, the National Theatre bringing its NT Live cinema screenings onto YouTube every Thursday night, and that's just one of the offerings we've had. And you're talking Frankenstein or One Man Two Governors, you're talking sort of almost millions of people collectively watching something on a small screen, really. Some people may be hooking up to TV, but it's a real sign, I think, that the old models, the old idea that this X sticks in one box and Y goes in another, that's collapsed. So I think it's sort of game on in terms of who wants to try what next. And I was speaking to virtual reality companies at the end of last year about what was going to happen digitally for theatre, and a lot of them were saying, it just needs a moment to catch fire, because we can see that already there's a kind of convergence with a generation that's grown up with its kind of iPhones and whatnot. That's going to be happening. And I think the idea that we might want to be able to replicate the exact experience of being in a theatre, but virtually, who isn't going to be looking into that from now on? Yeah. So 10 years from now, what we see is actually a very, very dark moment in British theatre, and the performing arts might be seen as a watershed. Fingers crossed, all the other things land in the right way. But I think there is no going back technically, because everyone's on Zoom. We didn't even talk about Zoom as a community 8 weeks ago, and now here we are. I'm talking to you like this, and there's never been more digital interconnection.
Dominic, it's been a real privilege to have you on this show. I've been absolutely fascinated. We could go on for a long time. The only thing I would say is, in thanking you so much for coming on, perhaps we're going to hopefully continue these programmes long into when COVID is finished. Perhaps we might, if you'd be willing, invite you to come back another time, perhaps to tell us how it all went according to our predictions and discussions this morning. But thank you very much indeed. It's been fascinating.
Thank you very much for letting me take part, and hopefully I'll be on that stage, not in the not too distant future.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Thank you.
David, over to you.
We've got to get you off the stage first.
Yes, we have.
I know you've got a very important call, Sir Geoffrey.
A conference, my weekly health conference.
Okay, so we did promise we'd try and rattle through a few more questions. Yeah. So don't wish to do disjustice to these questions, but we need to be quick. Rosemary Andrews, she was concerned that with the farming programme, do you have a view on whether we've got sufficient pickers that have been able to get into the country or been recruited locally? Are you aware of farmers being up to complement in terms of the number of pickers that they've got because of the quarantine?
So I think the short answer, Rosemary, is no. Even before we had the COVID crisis, there were real concerns from some of the soft fruit growers and top fruit growers and vegetable growers that they weren't going to have enough people to pick their crops and that some of them would go to waste in the field. And that is a terrible thing, to have gone to all the trouble to grow them. So I think the government will need to look very carefully at what has happened through COVID, and even when we go back to normal times, make sure that we can get enough pickers into this country.
Okay. Next question, it's the income support scheme. It's Peter Paredes. He is delighted to have got his 3-month payment, but he's worried with his wife having to shield as well that he won't be able to start his business anytime soon. Is it going to be extended?
Well, I don't know what's in the Chancellor's mind. I suspect that he is looking very carefully at the numbers and the amount that we've spent on this whole coronavirus, and he will look very carefully, as he's doing with the furloughed scheme, in the extension from till October. He is looking for employers to make a contribution to that scheme so that we can get people back to work and start to reduce their dependence on the scheme. So I think clearly we want to support business where we can. We've got to be mindful of how much money we're spending, and we've also got to try and, where it's safe to do so, to get as many businesses back to work as soon as possible.
Okay. Steve Jones, replying to Peter Paredes, saying, would you consider reviewing the very many people that don't appear to be eligible to these schemes? There is a sense, particularly some of the businesses we've talked to here, that there's a significant proportion of people who can't claim anything, and he's appealing to you to give that some serious consideration, bearing in mind you are championing this flag of getting people back to work.
So we've had this sort of discussion since we started these programs, and people have made the case on the program for additional help, and as things have gone along, we've got additional help. We've now got this additional grant scheme, the discretionary grant scheme. I stress again, those small businesses that may be eligible for it need to apply for it quickly. Yes, I accept, David, there will be people, and whatever happens, the government is not able to help everybody. There will be people that are not able to be helped, but we're trying to help as many people as we possibly can.
Okay. Lady who's sent a message in, Amanda Jane, who is one of our regular viewers, and she says from a parish council point of view, she wanted to hear any practical news that might help inform local Cotswold parish management for our village, especially as the country works through phases. I'm not sure, I think I only got half her question, but clearly she's concerned about practical issues to do with guiding parish councils and what they can and cannot do. But we may have to get that question sent to you directly, Sir Geoffrey.
Is this the Bourton issue?
I don't know, I think it must be the Bourton issue, yes.
So the issue with Bourton is that because the government guidance has said that people may go to places provided they return to their place of residence that day, the fear of the residents of Bourton is that large numbers of people will descend on the village and they will not exercise proper social distancing, and the residents will be put at risk. And whether they should open the car parks, which one has opened today, and then if it's open, what about the toilets which are not opened, and the safety to local residents of that being caused. I've spent some time on this morning, trying to see how we can best ameliorate the problem.
You're absolutely right, Sir Geoffrey, because it's now come through again. Please remember, your residents as well as your businesses, many locals are feeling unsettled by efforts to open businesses and push opening up. 1/4 of Bourton or the Water Parish Council is over 70, so at home isolating. It is easy to see the reason behind their fears, that tourist businesses opening too soon may bring unbearable risks to their village, stopping them feeling able to exercise and trapped in their homes still further. How do we reassure them? How do we get the balance right? How will you reflect residents' fears as well as the needs to support businesses?
I think we've got
That's the whole question.
I think we've got the message of the concern of the indigenous residents, and I absolutely understand that concern, and I think the absolute message that should go out nationally, yes, you may travel to places, but if you do, think very carefully what you're going to do when you get there. Are the car parks open? Are you all going to be parking with proper social distancing? Are the facilities like toilets open? If you're going to the Cotswolds, just come to somewhere relatively rural and isolated and go for a walk. But please don't all descend on Bourton, because that will put the local residents at risk.
Okay, just conscious of time, Ian has come back. Ian Hughes, thanks for your earlier answer. Continuing on the crucial theme of testing, after a slow start and some missteps, how is the government going to ensure that the test track trace capacity is fully up and running for the return, so that schools, children, parents and all school staff have the confidence to return? We're hearing in the media that some parents just aren't going to send their children back. Do you feel confident that we'll be in a place that will give that reassurance to parents and children?
Well, it's a fairly small number of people to start with that we're encouraging back to school, year 1 and year 6. I think that we've got to try and get the system up and running, try and see how that meshes in with those that are going back to school. And I don't think anybody's going to criticise any parent that doesn't send their child back to school because they don't think it's safe. Equally, I think we've got to give discretion to the headmasters and headmistresses of these primary schools as to how they can do it safely. And some will decide they can do it quite quickly. Others might decide that because of the size of their premises or whatever, they can't do it quite so quickly until the testing is properly up and running. So I think we're just going to have to see. I understand what you're saying, Ian. I understand you want to see the testing and tracing up and running today. These things take time, and the government are doing it at pace. A lot of people within the technology sector, within the health sector, are working very hard to get it up and running, and we must applaud them for their efforts.
Okay. Last question on the live stream. It's from Julie Monks. Would like it better if we featured more small British manufacturers. I know we're going to do a session on charities and the voluntary sector, then business, but to try and get small manufacturers mentioned, they're the people that are falling through the cracks. We've heard this issue of people who set themselves up as small companies and directors and so on. She's making a plea that we look at small businesses.
Well, I understand that, and we do have a real diversity of small businesses in the Cotswolds and in Gloucestershire in general. And I think what you've done is put it through my brain that we should liaise with the Federation of Small Businesses and perhaps think about doing a small business special session.
I think so, and I think some of these contributors are regular contributors, and I almost feel we want to get them together as a panel, because some of them are extremely, well, they're all articulate in their own ways, but people like Steve and Amanda Jane, I think we ought to have a panel with them on, so that they could actually respond directly to some of the comments that are being made. I would just like to end, Sir Geoffrey, thanking you and wishing you and Kim a wonderful bank holiday, but to say to people that the questions are reducing, and so that has got to be a good sign, and that you are available and your details are available if people wish to contact you directly. I know Steve Jones is going to write to you about something that upset him last time.
Clifton-Brown G at parliament.uk.
Thank you very much, Sir Geoffrey. Yes,
thank you, David.
For our 10th anniversary.
Indeed.
Okay, see you next week.
Thank you, everybody at the barn.
Good afternoon to our guest, our regular guest, Councillor Nigel Moore, who is the County Councillor and Cabinet Member for the Environment and Planning. And he also represents Cotswolds Stow Division in the north of the district. And Nigel's going to give us an update today on the reopening of the HRCs, the household recycling centres, Cotswold Friends, and the new strategy for walking and cycling from the County Council. So welcome, Nigel, over to you.
Well, good morning, David. It's very nice to be back on your show again. Let's talk about the Foss Cross that's reopened on Monday. The opening hours are 9 till 5 p.m. and as before, it's closed on Tuesdays, but it's open the remainder of the week. Now, people must pre-book. The booking system is online at Gloucestershire Recycles, and it works on a 14-day rolling basis. So it does mean that people can book well in advance. I went down to the site, and it was working well, and the staff had really ensured that there was plenty of space for social distancing. What is also good is that on the Foss, there are some very large advanced signage, basically saying to people, unless you've booked, please don't go down to the site. And the reaction I got from the members of the public and the staff was it was working well. We trialled this booking system in Gloucester before we reopened Foss Cross. And now with the success of the three, we're reopening the remainder, the other two sites in Stroud and Cinderford next week. So by the end of next week, all our sites will be fully functioning. And I have to say, the pre-booking system is working really so well. I think that although it is an additional cost, I think it's something that we'll probably want to retain, and it's something we might consult on later in the year and get the public reaction, but certainly the anecdotal reaction has been very positive.
Well, I was in a parish council meeting last night on Zoom, and two of the parish councillors had actually used the service, and they said it was brilliant. They actually said it was better than the previous service, because being able to pre-book actually helped quite a lot. So that's good news. And what's the situation on green waste at the HRCs? Are people just waiting for it to be collected on the curbside, or are they taking it up? Any feedback on that?
You can take green waste to the HRCs. We'd rather that people used the curbside collections, because the council has put so much commitment into that. But certainly people won't be turned away if they take green waste to the HRC.
Okay, that's really good news. Thanks, Nigel. And are you going to talk about Cotswold Friends next?
Well, I am, because I've had a report from them for the first 5 weeks of the lockdown. And it is quite a remarkable report. The calls and the emails that they're getting are stabilising now at about 3,000 a week, 3,000. And the number of people supported each week is about 1,000. Shopping trips and meals deliveries have increased to nearly 100 a week. Hospital and pharmacy visits to nearly 200 a week. Now, GCC and CDC, through a grant from us, have financially supported this work. But what Cotswold Friends have said to me is that as a result of this, there's a number of quite important things to think about. People who have received community services for the first time because of the pandemic might want to retain them. Secondly, some people are likely to have lost confidence to leave their homes, and some who are not housebound may become so. So in a sense, this could be a problem that's going to be with us for the foreseeable future. And they say that this is likely to affect all the parishes in the North Cotswolds. And we do need a comprehensive plan to be put in place to manage this transition period and get the ongoing community support. And it's something I want to engage with, because before the lockdown, we had already set up 2 trials in the North Cotswolds and the Forest of Dean of a new form of community transport, which through telephone booking and online booking is more responsive to people's needs, and in a sense is a rural form of Uber. Now, what is really quite encouraging is that the success of the booking system at the HRC suggests to me that a booking system for community transport would equally be successful. And it means that we can respond to people's specific needs rather than trying to put up scheduled services which might not necessarily suit people from a timing point of view. So this is something, again, we're working on, and something which we need to bring out of, when we get out of the lockdown, it's something we need to be able to put into place.
Well, it's what you and I spoke about a few weeks ago, isn't it? You said,
yes.
You said that even though we're going through a terribly difficult time, there'll be some good stuff that comes out of it, and we'll learn new ways of doing things in our rural communities. And those are 2 really good examples.
Well, there's a third now, which is the walking and cycling, because you probably read government has announced a 250 million grant scheme out of something even bigger, 2 billion on walking and cycling improvements. And so this week, our officers have been working hard on a plan which we've sent out to county councillors and also the districts. And what we're looking to do is to try and identify in each district the top 3 priorities for pop-up schemes. We're looking at schemes in Cheltenham, Gloucester and Tewkesbury, but also nearer home, we're looking at a scheme in Bourton-on-the-Water. Because as you know, Bourton-on-the-Water has had signs up basically saying to visitors, stay away, because they've been concerned about the risk of COVID-19. But clearly, once the lockdown starts to ease, certainly domestic visitors will be going to Bourton-on-the-Water. And what we want to ensure is that there's safe social distancing in Bourton-on-the-Water. So these schemes are being worked on now. The county councillors in the respective areas are being consulted, and we're hoping by the end of next week to have these schemes in place. We don't yet know when we're going to get the money from government. We might get an announcement today, we might get one early next week. But what we want to be is on the front foot and have these schemes ready to go when we know what the money availability is going to be. So that's my report, David.
Okay.
Lots that's going on.
Lots of good stuff, and I gather that you're now going to share your weekly broadcasts with Lyndon Stowe, so that he'll do 1 week and you'll have a week off.
That's right. That's right.
That's.
But
really...
I have to say, David, I mean, the officers at, I'm sure it's the same elsewhere, the officers at Gloucestershire County Council are working incredibly hard. I mean, one of the problems about virtual reality is it's 24/7. It's not 9 to 5 anymore. And officers are working long hours because we're in this recovery phase now, which is so crucial. I mean, I personally, like many people, I'm really, really concerned about the potential level of unemployment. We are getting a number of schemes together, which I'd like to talk about on another occasion and let you have a feel for the restructuring which we're already embarking on.
Well, we're going to, Sir Geoffrey's very keen that not next week, but the week after, which is your week, we're going to talk about finance and the economy and how we can restart it. So that would fit in really, really well with that theme for 2 weeks' time. So it's been very good to hear you again and to see you in your new studio, Nigel. Can I wish you, as I always do, a very good bank holiday weekend? And let's hope that the tourists that do come down behave sensibly and that we all continue to stay alert. So have a very good weekend.
Thank you, David, very much. Thank you.
Great to hear from Nigel Moore, and he's been a regular contributor to this programme. We thought we'd end on a couple of videos. One in Chipping Campden, which is really well put together by some local residents, Arthur Cunningham, and fronted by Gina Bloomfield, one of our district councillors. And then a fascinating edit at the end of the programme from Councillor Richard Morgan, another regular contributor, interviewing the owners of Chavenage, a really lovely venue down near Tetbury, which has been used for many film shoots and TV series, and the difficulties that they're having as a result of coronavirus. Thank you.
Hello, I am Gina Bloomfield, and as one of your 2 district councillors representing the Camden and Vale ward, I wanted to give all those volunteers, helpers and shopkeepers a huge vote of thanks for your tireless work in supporting people locally during this awful COVID-19 crisis. The community spirit shown by everyone in Chipping Campden, Mickleton, Western Subedge and Willersey, and the smaller hamlets surrounding them has been amazing. Camden Support Hub has brought together volunteers for shopping, prescriptions and other support services. This brilliant video they put together for me explains it all.
This is Chipping Campden, usually a bustling town, now strangely quiet. But the community have been very busy supporting one another during the pandemic. The Coronavirus Support Hub was created in early March, and it now supports around 90 people in the town with a similar number of volunteers. The volunteers have been shopping for vulnerable people and collecting plenty of prescriptions.
Hello, I'm John Howells and I deliver prescriptions around Chipping Campden as part of the Chipping Campden Support Hub services. It's great fun, I meet lots of lovely people and I've really got to know the town much, much better.
This is Andrea, one of the volunteer newspaper delivery team, started by Mark Evans.
Hi, my name is Anna and I am the manager of Millhouse Caring Homes Group in Chipping Campden. Twice a year, Millhouse hosts a teddy bear picnic for the community.
The virtual Teddy Bears picnic will be at Millhouse on Monday the 11th of May. Do send us a photo and good wishes.
A hardship fund has been set up for those facing financial pressure as a result of coronavirus. As Edward Ibbotson explains.
Hello, my name is Reverend Edward Ibbotson, one of the ministers at Chipping Campden Baptist Church. Our communities come together to create the Community Hardship Fund in response to the COVID crisis. We're working with the local doctors, the local schools and other community leaders in supporting in real times of crisis at the moment. A brief application form for people to apply. We're able to respond quickly, we're able to respond practically in connection with if there's things that are broken down, with help with rent, but also to help direct people to food bank for food support. We've been really encouraged by the generosity and kindness of our community, but also recognising some real hardships and difficulties in our community in this crisis.
Hi, I'm Tuti. I coordinate the food bank at Chipping Campden Baptist Church. We're part of the North Cotswold group. Not surprisingly, we've seen a vast increase in usage of the food banks over the last few weeks. Trussell Trust have come up with figures nationally, but again, over the North Cotswold, we bucked that trend and our increase has been larger than the national average. We're having a lot of people, obviously, who are coming into a food bank for the first time, and we do acknowledge that that's a really big thing for people. It's the last place on earth that they would really want to be. So I just want to stress that this sort of crisis can happen to any one of us, and that there's absolutely no shame in needing to come, particularly when you want to feed your family. We like to show as much compassion as we can, given the social distancing circumstances, but everyone is welcome.
And it's not just helping the residents of Chipping Campden. 120 seamstresses, led by Ashley Nichols and her mother Sue Breslin, have been busy making laundry bags for the dirty uniforms of key workers, face masks and headbands to make them more comfortable to wear. Parcels have been sent out to NHS staff and frontline workers both locally and as far afield as Southampton and Cardiff, with over 5,500 bags, 3,600 headbands and 500 masks sent out to date.
And to help keep everyone safe, Barney in the local post office has been manufacturing hand sanitisers.
If you're in the vulnerable group and live in Chipping Campden, do get in touch, whether it's for shopping, prescriptions, newspapers, simply to stay in touch, or if you're facing financial hardship. We're here to help. It's a free service.
As well as the Camden Support Hub, I also wanted to give a huge shout out recognising the Mickleton Helpers, Willersey COVID-19 Support Group and Western Sub-Edge Coronavirus Support Group. Together, these volunteers have contacted everyone in their areas, with leaflet drops giving not just contact information, but advice and help, which has been invaluable. Both Chipping Campden and Mickleton have also received generous donations to set up hardship funds to enable them to buy food and other necessities for residents feeling the pinch during these difficult times. Whilst it is always invidious to pick out any individual or organisation, I must flag up Liz Evans of the Mickleton Helpers, whose speed and efficiency at setting up this volunteer group was simply amazing. And more than that, she shared her experience and advice with many other volunteer groups that were being set up at the same time. I know Arthur and Rachel Cunningham were grateful for all the hints Liz gave them when they started the Camden Support Hub. Here is Liz in her new allotment. The Mickleton Post Office, run by Gary and Gaby, has provided essential services over long hours. Harge, at nicer stores, has kept everything well stocked and runs an ordering and delivery service with the Mickleton Helpers. Page's Farm Shop packs and arranges delivery of fresh vegetables and fruit. David Moore, the butcher, has never been busier, dispatching orders far and wide, and both the King's Arms and Decades Tea Rooms are providing pre-ordered takeaway meals. In Willersey, the local shop, Willersey Stores, has provided invaluable support for the neighbourhood and go above and beyond their normal role by cooking a hot lunch for an elderly resident and staying with him while he eats it, as his dementia can mean that he would forget to finish the meal. Willersey Garage, owned by Peter Taylor for over 50 years, has also provided an important service by staying open in the mornings on weekdays for people to buy their fuel, as we are a long way from other petrol stations. Western Sub-Edge has formed a group of volunteers, and everyone is looking after their neighbours by offering to do their shopping and collect prescriptions if they're going out on personal errands, as well as chatting to people who may be lonely on their own.
I know there will be many I have missed out. So finally, can I give a really big shout out for every single person and business who has contributed so magnificently to help out during this COVID-19 crisis. Thank you. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
So I'm at Chavenage House, which is located just outside of Tetbury, and this is one of our major country houses in the area. So it's really diversified its business over the last 10 years. It offers 4x4 off-roading, it offers clay pigeon shooting. It's also one of our major wedding venues. It's also now a filming location as well as offering guided tours. So I'm going to go in now and meet the owners and discuss exactly how they're adapting to COVID-19 and what impact the coronavirus has had on the house and its business.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Caroline Leslie-Williams. I run Chavenage House for the Leslie-Williams family, my family. We have for the last 50 years operated it as a wedding venue, a tourist attraction, and we also do corporate entertaining and anything that really comes our way. We have built it up over the years, and we just recently have had very good publicity. We were a location for the very popular BBC Poldark, and just going into lockdown, a feature film, Jane Austen's Emma, was out, in which Chavenage played Randalls, which meant that our order book was as full as we've ever had it. A lot of visits were coachloads of people coming. We would take up to 50 in a coach. They would come, be given some sort of hospitality in the house, whether it's coffee or lunch or a tea, and a fully guided tour with one of the members of the family guiding. Those people, generally, the demographics were older people, and really the week prior to lock-up or lockdown, they were the people who were first worried, the people who'd been told to shield themselves. So that business really stopped dead at that moment. Any booking really up till the end of June were cancelling that week. We rather hoped that maybe some of the events would go on. We had a 80th birthday, a 90th birthday, a golden wedding, and a Lions dinner and a Probus dinner, all organised. All of those went by the by. Some of the people have been looking for dates later in the year, but it looks like it will probably be going on now into 2021, which causes a bit of a problem because there's a backlog of people who already booked 2021. Weddings-wise, we've lost one already. There was one in a couple of weeks' time in June. They've rebooked into late September, and then the 2 July ones are sort of cancelling and trying to work out what to do. I think they're going to go ahead and have the small ceremony somewhere and maybe have a party next year. My word really is not to forget the entertainment trade or the tourism trade. It has in the past been one of the biggest earners for the country. It's going to be difficult. I don't quite know how we're going to sell ourselves. Most of the attractions were going round in some houses, fairly small rooms to look at. Wedding trade, again, who knows? But what we have got, we've got space here. We certainly would be not adverse to thinking of other ideas if everyone came across. I mean, obviously this year, without the festivals and things going, there must be companies who've got tents or shepherd's huts or something. We've got fields. Maybe we could put the two together and have people on stay vacations and using some of it. Because, you know, in the Cotswolds, I mean, just looking around, we have got some of the best natural beauty anywhere in the country, and we shouldn't be embarrassed about trying to sell that. And, you know, outside-wise, I mean, if the weather stays like it is now, it must be possible to do events outside for those who can do it. The gardens, there are venues with gardens which could be opened. People could be asked to be socially aware, walking around gardens. At the moment, that's impossible. And, you know, people have been encouraged to go outside. Maybe we could start loosening the leash a little bit on venues with gardens and go around doing that. And maybe we won't be able to feed them because that means you have to go, and maybe we do it on a self-service basis outside, just offer people a simple cup of tea or something like that. We're going to get out of it, but the house like behind, it's just the ongoing maintenance of a place. If we could have anything given our way, we would very much like something like VAT taken off graded listed buildings, so we can carry on doing the repairs without that huge expense being added on top of it. And really, just we have been well supported by the local tourism agencies, the Cotswolds, the Gloucestershire, Visit Wiltshire. We're not so far away from that. They're all out there. They have been sending advice, and we're grateful for it, because what we do, although there couldn't be a nicer place to be isolated than at Chavenage, there has been this sense of isolation for the last 9 weeks. You haven't seen anybody. You haven't been able to sort of bounce ideas off. Did have a Zoom meeting with people similar sort of house as this, and we through the historic house. It was historic house HHA, trying to work out which way we're going forward. I mean, as I say, we were lucky. We had filming fairly recently, which has helped. We had got our maintenance, up to a fair amount, but it never stops.
That was a great video from Chipping Campden. I'm delighted to have with us on Zoom Tim Sexton, who is the manager of the Tourist Information Centre in Chipping Campden, and he has been the manager for 12 years, so he knows what he's talking about when it comes to tourism. So what did you think of the video then, Tim?
Oh, the videos were very good, David.
Great.
Very, very good indeed.
Great. I just wondered, we'd just like to get a flavour of what life's like running a tourist information centre in one of our major attractions in the Cotswolds. So when the government announced the lockdown, what effectively happened to your business when that occurred 2 months ago?
Effectively, it died. That's the short, punchy answer, David. It died because our particular premises, as are much of my colleagues, are not convenient for social distancing of any kind. So we weren't getting any visitors to the town. So the simple thing to do was to close down and preserve our limited resources.
Okay, and how has from your perspective, because you live just outside the town, how's this sort of tourist economy managed in the last few weeks? I mean, have you seen various initiatives that emerge in the town that you think are exciting?
There are no, as far as I can tell, there are no initiatives regarding restarting the economy. At the moment, it's purely supporting the economy, supporting the people in the town who need help. Camden Hub have done a great job of providing that. But as regards people in the town, I mean, it's a ghost town.
And this time of year, normally, you'd be absolutely heaving, wouldn't you?
Well, certainly Easter, we've had such fine weather, we would have expected to have been very, very busy.
So what do you, given that the government have eased the restrictions and that we've got this message going out that, according to the district council, that the Cotswolds is closed, what do you anticipate is likely to happen over the bank holiday weekend?
A very, very difficult, it's a very complex question, because there are no easy answers to how people will treat and respond to the social distancing measures and being in the appropriate social groups. So as far as the town is concerned, we've got the food resource shops like the Co-op and One Stop. They're open, but very strict controls still maintained within the premises. But other businesses, no, as far as I can tell, no other businesses are open apart from those that are doing takeaways.
And what do you...
Pubs are shut, hotels are closed, etc.
Okay, and how do you, have you got a view, a perspective on what you think is going to happen in the next few months? Do you think we'll see any business tourist-wise during the course of the next few months, or do you think this is a write-off this year? My honest gut opinion is it's going to be a write-off,
because if the weather stays warm and social distancing is eased, people will head to the coastal regions. We experienced this last year, which was, from our point of view, a bad year because we had a damp start to the year. People didn't arrive. We had a very hot spell. People went to the coast. The town was not inundated with people.
So it sounds a bit gloomy, doesn't it, Tim? Looking to the.
I'm afraid, from my perspective, in the information centre, it is gloomy, and I hope that in the future we can find ways around. My colleagues and I, running the information centre, are looking at ways to use the social distancing measures to get people in, but it all depends on people coming to the town.
But do you see a future for the TIC, and that you're committed to making sure that we can look forward to 2021 with a
Oh yes, we're committed, heavily committed to providing service and information to the public, both visitors and community alike. We're very heavily committed. Our own website, camdenonline.org, provides lots of local and visitor information. We have a very big front page full of COVID-19 information, which goes out globally. So we're providing that information, and we'll keep it as up to date as we can as soon as the information comes in. Hopefully, with the government money that's come through, we can stay within our resources and hopefully kick off maybe later in the year. But it all depends on social distancing and people's ability to feel safe when they travel away from their own local community.
Okay, Tim, thank you very much for coming on the phone and on the Zoom, and for giving us such a direct and honest perspective on what happens. Because, as you quite rightly say, it's easy for the government to ease the lockdown, but your business is one of those that's been dramatically affected, and we've just got to hope and pray that we can come through this together. And we'll stay in touch. Hopefully you'll come back on when things are a bit better, because this is a weekly show, so we'd love to have you back on later on in the year. Okay.
I would love to appear again, David, as you well know, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you to these programs, because I found them fascinating. I'm catching up on them now, but they are very well done.
Okay, thank you very much. Good to see you. Take care.
Good to see you too, David. Bye-bye.
Bye.